Well, welcome everybody to Federal Dollars, State Policies and Heat Pumps, the future of heat in the Northeast. This is a continuation of RAP and CLASP's series on heat pump adoption around the U.S. We're very glad you could join us today. Now, while the IRA is a significant step forward, states are demonstrating that decarbonization of home heating and cooling requires additional policy initiatives. For example, workforce training and development, improved energy efficiency program delivery, public access and participation. Today's webinar focuses on activity in the Northeast. We'll be looking at broad market trends and at different approaches being adopted by several specific jurisdictions that build on state policies and further leverage federal funds to deliver more efficient heating and cooling in homes. We have some terrific speakers today. David Liss, who's Director of Technology Market Transformation at NEEP, the Northeast Energy Efficiency Partnerships. Hank Webster, Senior Policy Advisor at Connecticut Department of Energy and Environmental Protection. And we're also very fortunate to have Peter McPhee, who's the Senior Program Director at the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center. Our moderators today are going to be Vivian Cox from CLASP and Louisa Eberle from RAP. Before we start in earnest here, several process-related points. You're all muted. A lot of you on. It's just easier that way to have you muted. Questions go in the Q&A. That should be obvious, but we like to include, just to remind you folks to do that. We're recording this. You may have seen that when you signed on. And remember, this is going to go 60 minutes roughly. And we are going to tie a little bow around this and stop the recording and go on another 30 minutes for those of you who want to stick around and continue the discussion. So I think we're ready to roll. And Vivian, the microphone's yours.
Thanks, Dave, for that introduction. And thanks again to our panelists for taking the time to share their expertise with us today. So I'm going to kick us off with our conversation with Dave Liss, who's going to provide a broader picture of the Northeast region for us. So Dave, to start, can you talk to us about the Northeast and where different states are right now with heat pump programs and adoption?
Sure. Hey, Vivian. Hey, everyone. Thanks again for having me. I am with NEEP up in the Northeast, as Dave mentioned. And we are wrapping up some market assessment work. NEEP's been leading a regional market transformation initiative around air source heat pumps for about a decade now. So good insight into generally the market and what has happened, what is happening, and some thoughts on going forward. But so the report's not done. I think we'll likely be publishing in January, but the purpose of it was really to do a scan of the region of the Northeast, and our region stretches from Maine down to DC. Was to ask this kind of question around what is the state of the market, and then secondly, what are some of the key opportunities for further developing adoption of air source heat, in particular air source heat pumps. We do work that stretches across a lot of different heat pump types in different sectors, but this was mainly focused on residential split air source heat pumps. So as part of that work, we tried to understand current market penetration of where we are as a region with air source heat pumps. And this was something that we had to do a little bit of, we had to take a number of data sets and sort of played with them a little bit to come up with some numbers. This is definitely an area of opportunity that probably a lot of stakeholders are interested in as we're thinking about driving further adoption. Is just having better transparency into these markets. So we could talk more about that later, but just the fact that we had a real challenge in gathering this kind of data around where the market was is is an opportunity. But that being said, we sort of did our best attempt at understanding where heat pumps land in the market today, and we estimated that heat pumps make up about a little over 30% of the residential HVAC market. So we're looking at forced air furnaces, gas furnaces, boilers, central air conditioners included, and air source heat pumps. We landed on this approximately this 30% number. And I can talk a little bit about how some states in the Northeast and beyond have come together around some adoption goals, and how that 30% number is relevant to those longer term goals. Anyway, when we look at the market, you know, we're thinking about sizing it. We're also looking at, you know, what kind of promotional activities are going on out there. So we did a scan of existing programs in the Northeast. Heat pump programs are ubiquitous. Like every state, every state is offering some form of incentive, typically a downstream rebate to incent customers to adopt air source heat pumps, up to $10,000 in our region for various configurations. Some of the trends we're seeing is that whereas we might have seen a lot of adoption in the partial displacement kinds of scenarios for heat pump adoption, more programs are really aligning and focusing towards whole home systems, so systems that are carrying the full design load of a home. That's definitely a shift we're seeing. Programs are offering incentives based on project and not necessarily capacity, trying to maybe get away from incentivize kind of pushing oversized systems, and there's a whole host of issues with that, but we've seen that as far as some of these program trends. Many are trying to do a better job of reaching LMI customers, so bringing equity goals to their programs, bringing with explicit targets. So we're definitely seeing programs make increased efforts at not only making those systems more affordable. The IRA, the new programs through the IRA are starting to help support that. But at the state level, a lot of states are looking to make sure their programs are reaching these kinds of customers as well. So programs, general kind of where we are with market adoption, I'd say, you know, a whole host of a number of sort of regulatory areas the region is looking into. I know certainly as part of our market assessment in terms of what are the big barriers and opportunities, this rollout of thoughtful rollout of regulations over the next 5 to 10 years is definitely a kind of a key piece to that. I will stop with that. Hopefully that's a good start.
That's great, Dave. I think thanks for this fantastic insight. I think it's really encouraging to hear that so many states are offering incentives and queuing up regulatory action. So I was wondering now if you could speak a little bit to NEEP's priorities, or where you think it's important to focus regarding building electrification and heat pump adoption specifically.
Yeah, so as part of this market assessment, a key part of it was to really ask those kinds of questions. Where as a regional organization, and where are other players in this market development space? What are some of those big opportunities? Affordability has been an issue in the market for a long time, whether it's the upfront cost to install heat pumps. An emerging challenge that I think the Northeast is starting to face is around the operational barriers around the operational economics of operating heat pumps compared to other fossil types of systems. So definitely this sort of these economic challenges are you know, have been challenges and continue to be. I mentioned the operational economics. You know, historically the Northeast has had a lot of delivered fuels and have I think a lot of the inroads that the market's made around these delivered fuels, the operational economics were and are still are quite positive. So as there are more and more installations or, you know, applications looking to replace natural gas systems, these challenges around operational economics are, you know, kind of becoming even more acute. So that is definitely an area that I know a number of states are already looking at very carefully, and that NEEP will be as well. You know, the workforce to deliver these solutions is critical. So whether it's working on the kinds of workforce development programs that are bringing new types of workers and talent into this space is a big regional opportunity, as is just instilling better better practices into the existing workforce, whether that's designing systems, sizing systems, installing systems, commissioning systems. Like you know, unfortunately, these heat pumps are not just a plug and play solution. So all of these adjacent issues and challenges around, you know, getting these systems to operate well and getting consumer satisfaction is really rolled up into this workforce development efforts. The sort of one of the original challenges just around consumer awareness and education, getting folks to understand what this technology is. We're still not where we need to be, and just what it is, what the value proposition is. Lot of programs in throughout the region are active in this space. And then I just say we are, you know, we're mainly talking about the residential single family sector. We are definitely, I'd say, realizing that the market for commercial and some of the large multifamily kinds of applications are probably 5 or 10 years behind where we are with these residential applications. So trying to, you know, shed a light on the need to get into these other sectors and what is going to be needed. So I'd say just broadening the perspective and the scope of solutions. And the last thing I'll say is just, again, on this market, this data issue is that, you know, as anybody that cares about trying to drive adoption of these solutions, if you don't understand where you are and what kind of progress you're making, it's you know, you're kind of you're not able to really, you know, have a thoughtful feedback loop to understand what's working, what's not. So plug for, you know, the making this data through different mechanisms available to the market.
Thanks, Dave. Again, I think you know, workforce development and operational costs are both really important topics, and I'm glad to hear that Northeast states sound like they're at least starting to think about and address these challenges. So I just have a couple more questions for you. I think we're almost at time. Could you talk to us a little bit more about collaboration across states? I think this is a really important topic and one that maybe doesn't always get as much attention as it should. And then finally, yeah, if you had any other points from the report that you're coming out with soon, we'd love to hear highlights from that.
Sure. Well, I would just generally make a plug about the opportunities to collaborate across states. You know, NEEP is a partnership organization, you know, very much built on the idea that we can be more effective in the market if we can align and we can allow states to roll out these kinds of efforts in a collaborative kind of way, whether that's more efficient from the state side or from the kinds of markets that they're working within. So I would just plug that as we're thinking about ways of and how folks on the phone can be a part of help make these market development efforts successful. Thinking about how to plug in across whether you're at the state level or a utility or other market actors, how to collaborate across territories and states is we've found to be very, very useful. And when we can achieve that kind of collaboration, we are really able to have a lot of impact in the market. So I just generally a plug across that. The NEEP initiative itself has a number of a number of working groups and sort of opportunities to collaborate on very specific issues. So we have a couple of collaborative platforms that are higher level, and then some that are a bit more in the weeds on some of these topics that we'll be talking about today. So plugging NEEP as a platform for that kind of collaboration. Organizations like NESCOM have really been effective at bringing states together to make some of these very ambitious market adoption goals out to 2030 and 2040. So we're seeing not just energy agencies but air agencies collaborating, which is fantastic. And I know Hank will talk a little bit more about a multi-state accelerator initiative that is similarly facilitating a number of states to roll out a sub-regional program. So I'll leave it at that.
Thanks again, Dave. Some really great insights. Now I'm going to invite Hank Webster to come off mute as we dive a little bit deeper into specific state level programs. First, I wanted to ask you, Hank, if you could talk a little bit about building electrification initiatives in Connecticut and what seems to be working for the state right now.
Sure. No, thanks. And thanks for having me on this webinar. It's a wonderful opportunity to talk about a lot of interesting developments that are going on. In Connecticut, as David mentioned, we, like other states, have heat pump incentives through our conservation and load management plan, which is branded Energize CT. So, utility administered efficiency programs are offering incentives to adopt heat pumps. In addition to that, we are advancing electric code for all new construction, as well as with our partner agencies, for instance, Connecticut Housing and Finance Authority, really making sure that when we're building new or rehabbing buildings, that it is moving to an electrification standard. So, we're very supportive of that, and we know that that's a great opportunity to reduce emissions, improve health, improve public safety, and really make the most efficient use of the energy systems that we have. So, the efficiency programs have seen incredible uptake of heat pump adoption over the past several years. We expect that trend to continue, and we're very excited about it. It's a really important piece of the puzzle in meeting our state's greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals, as well as tangential improvements. We also have a weatherization goal in the state. So as we all know, or hopefully all know on this webinar, it's really optimal to pair weatherization with heat pump adoption so that you're making the most efficient use of that technology.
Thanks, Hank, for that additional context. That's really interesting. So as some of us may know already, Connecticut is the lead state in the New England Heat Pump Accelerator, which is a program that just received funding from the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant, which is a federal bucket of funding under the Inflation Reduction Act, the IRA, from the EPA. Could you talk a little bit about what you plan to do with that grant?
Absolutely. Yeah, it's a large grant from the EPA. We're very appreciative of the support. It is a 5-state coalition, so Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, Maine, and New Hampshire. And it's a 5-year program. So this $450 million is spread out amongst the states and over those 5 years. And it's really based on 3 hubs or pillars, if you will. The first is a market hub, which is designed to develop midstream incentives to encourage the distributor contractor relationship, increased adoption of heat pumps, and more stocking of heat pumps, more incentives to recommend heat pumps, and also to develop some workforce training so that folks, are up to speed on the latest developments in heat pumps and making sure that they're sizing them properly to the space. So that's the first hub or pillar of the program, and that represents $270 million of the $450 million grant. And each state will have an allocation there. And it's really important that we align those with existing program incentives to really optimize the opportunity for consumers. The second pillar or hub is the Innovation Hub, which is designed to support community quick start grants to overcome unique barriers, and particularly in low income and disadvantaged communities, environmental justice communities, and also to support 1 to 2 large-scale heat pump deployment projects in each state, and again, designed to overcome some existing barriers. So, there could be challenges in historically in deploying heat pumps in certain building types or certain combinations of incumbent HVAC systems. If there's an innovative project that seeks to deploy heat pumps to replace the incumbent HVAC systems, then those might be good opportunities for this Innovation Hub program, and those will kind of be evaluated on a competitive basis. And that Innovation Hub program represents $90 million of the $270 million. And then finally, there's a Resource Hub, which is really designed to develop, curate, collect, instigate new research or new educational resources, rather, to help consumers, contractors, and any other stakeholders really understand the benefits of heat pumps, optimizing installation, looking at things like refrigerant management, looking at things on how to help consumers operate the systems most efficiently. Really anything that we can pull together to advance the common and collective understanding of how beneficial heat pumps can be, and how to properly incentivize and operate them. So those are the main sort of pillars of the program. The goal, the outcome that we're looking forward to is a reduction of over 9 million metric tons of pollution across the states through 2050. And also to transform the marketplace in line with the NESCOM and U.S. Climate Alliance goals to really increase the market share of heat pumps across the HVAC industry. So we're really excited about the program. We're still getting started. We're assembling the advisory council, which serves as the governance structure. But we're really excited, and we expect the program and all of these incentives and opportunities to be available mid-2025.
That's great, Hank. If I heard you correctly, you mentioned briefly that some of the CPRG funding is being dispersed to a 5-state coalition.
Mhm.
I was wondering if you could talk more about partnerships with state agencies and ways to integrate programs across states.
Yeah, so as part of that 5-state coalition, we are in partnership with the Energy Office, and sometimes with a quasi-state entity in those states. So, the state energy offices that have the sort of jurisdiction or purview on these issues are the partners to this. And so we're working with them to make sure that we design the program in a way that works across the 5 states. We want to make sure that it's aligned and understanding of what the opportunities already are, and the efficiency programs and any other offerings that states may have. And our goal is to not sow confusion. We are looking to align the opportunities, make sure that it's understandable for consumers, for contractors, for the whole industry. And so we're learning too from the different states. We've all had heat pump programs, we've all operated them differently, and so that's another big piece of this partnership, is to learn from past examples, from past implementation, and to really advance heat pump programs that are on the leading edge, and making sure that we advance it as quickly as possible.
That's a great answer, Hank. I'll just pose one more question to you. So you spoke, for example, about avoiding confusion and trying to align states on programs, opportunities, and offerings. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit also about the importance of consolidating programs.
Yeah, so it's, it was a big principle for all of the states that were participating in this coalition. We didn't want to create something that was potentially competing with other offerings. We wanted to enhance and align, and particularly, at this time, at this point in our collective histories right now, we also have all of these federal incentives and opportunities, from tax credits to home energy rebate programs, all of these fantastic ways to decarbonize, to save energy, to save money. And so we want to make sure that we're not unintentionally disqualifying customers, for instance, from being able to take advantage of one program because they took advantage of the other. We want to make sure that we're integrating that all, and each state is pursuing those opportunities in slightly different ways. So that's a big chunk of the challenge, and the opportunity is for us to make sure that we are rowing in the same direction, and making sure that we are planning and revising the program over the 5 years to really make sure that we're taking advantage of all of the incentives that are out there. And I also think that there's a huge opportunity for all of our states and states beyond New England to make sure that any communications that we're having out to consumers are clear, and that it's easy for them to understand what their opportunities are, what their best strategies are to decarbonize their space and water heating. And I should have mentioned that the program, the accelerated program, is focused on residential HVAC and specifically air source, ground source, and heat pump water heaters.
Thanks, Hank. That's all fantastic information. I just wanted to see if there's anything else that you wanted to add before we pass it to Louisa, and she can hold a discussion with Peter really quickly.
And I mean, the only thing I would add is just that it's really important for us to recognize that this is both an energy efficiency opportunity. Heat pumps are the most energy efficient technology to cool your space. It's also really, really important as our climate continues to go through extremes, and we're having more extreme heat. Heat pumps are great because, unlike some of their fossil fuel counterparts that are incumbent HVAC equipment, they also provide air conditioning or dehumidification, and that's just becoming so increasingly important, particularly in the Northeast. We are getting more precipitation, including today. Huge deluge in this region, if anybody's calling in from that part of the world. And so heat pumps are a really fantastic opportunity to more efficiently meet those needs, and also improve public health, safety, and have an impact on the climate.
Thanks, Hank. Fantastic reply. All right, Louisa, I'll let you take it from here.
Awesome. Thanks, Vivian, and thanks to David and Hank for a good conversation so far. I'm going to invite Peter McPhee here to talk a little bit more about Massachusetts. I will also put in a plug for the audience. Please feel free to submit questions. We've already gotten a couple, and you'll see some answers that have already gone out. But as you have questions that come up, feel free to submit those. So Peter, what is the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center? What kind of work do you do? If you could just describe that to kick us off here.
Well, thank you, Louisa, and good afternoon, everybody. So the Massachusetts Clean Energy Center is a climate innovation laboratory with a target on the net zero by 2050. So essentially, we're focused on establishing the market, technology, and policy level solutions for 2030 and beyond as we make this energy transition. So in doing this work, we play a role in convening industry, accelerating early stage companies in this space, in the climate tech space, supporting policy development in the state, and helping establish the market and the workforce solutions that are necessary for the energy transition. So specifically in the building space, a big focus of our work is on establishing the lowest cost approaches to retrofitting buildings. Since at least here in Massachusetts, a vast majority of buildings in 2050 already exist today. So it's really critical that we focus on retrofits. But we're also focusing on trying to surface the solutions that are necessary to advance the energy transition, environmental justice communities, as well as working with consumers and industry as they make these changes.
Awesome, thanks. It sounds like such an important and good role. Can you tell us a little bit about the various building decarbonization programs that are currently available in Massachusetts? I know there's a lot of them.
Yeah, there certainly are. And I think, we essentially have two sets of directions of policies and programs in Massachusetts into two categories here. So number one are the consumer-driven programs, and this is really what I'm going to focus on today. And these have been the ones that have been around for the longest time, that are helping consumers when they elect to make changes in their homes and businesses to make these changes. The other side of it is more utility-driven programs, which are more recently emerging in Massachusetts as a change agent for decarbonization. So on the consumer-driven programs, the primary programming that we have in Massachusetts is through the Mass Save energy efficiency programs, which are run by the utilities and program administrators in Massachusetts. And these are relatively large programs that do everything from weatherization to heat pump incentives for residential and larger buildings. And those apply to all sorts of buildings, new and old, and have really been critical to reducing energy usage in the state and helping meet our carbon goals. We also have relatively strict building codes and building energy codes in Massachusetts, including some building energy codes that require new construction to be essentially fossil fuel free or equivalent to that. We have policies promoting solar and storage. We have some modest tax credits as well in the state that support that. On my side of things at Mass EC and some other related organizations, we have smaller programs that are focused on market innovation, such as like piloting how to do building decarbonization, doing workforce training, and engaging with consumers. There are a number of upcoming policies that will be relevant in the space, including the Clean Heat Standard, which is currently under development in the state. And I'll say there's also other policies that have been considered, in Massachusetts and other states that are relevant, including building performance standards. And I know in Boston and Cambridge here in Massachusetts, we already have a building performance standard for larger buildings to meet, as well as discussions about appliance emission standards that have been going on across the country for specifically appliances. Now, on the other side of this, on the utility-driven side, this is becoming a little bit clearer in the last couple of years and more recently even, but that we have requirements on our utilities that they're going to have to help meet our net zero future by 2050. So we've seen even earlier this week that one gas utility in Massachusetts proposed in their targeted electrification pilot that they will decommission 14 gas segments in Massachusetts for a total of 118 customers that would be transitioned off of very old gas lines that would be too expensive to repair and onto electrification technologies. So that's a utility-driven decarbonization action. And similarly, last month, Massachusetts enacted a law that enabled gas utilities the ability to, instead of just deliver gas, they could deliver thermal energy in the form of network geothermal as part of their business model. So if they can be delivering that to consumers, and that's a low cost-effective, carbon-free or low-carbon solution, then that's something that they can use as part of their business model.
Thanks so much. Hopefully the variety of policies and programs available is sparking some inspiration for folks that are listening to this webinar. It does raise the question. There are a lot of cooks in the kitchen in Massachusetts, lots of different entities involved in moving all of these programs forward. Do you have best practices or thoughts about how to coordinate across all of these different entities and different funding sources? How do you design policies that can complement each other across these different entities?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And I think there's a lot of intersecting responsibility across the state. So for example, our Department of Environmental Protection is responsible for meeting our greenhouse gas emissions goals. The utilities have their own responsibilities for reducing the climate impact of their systems and shifting towards net zero. Department of Public Utilities regulates the utilities. We also have a Department of Energy Resources, which implements clean energy and resilience regulations. And then there's Mass EC, who's working to establish the solutions that will be used in this process in coming decades. And then there's even more than that. So it's really important that entities coordinate and align. And I'll be honest, from firsthand experience, that's a lot of hard work to do. And it gets increasingly challenging, I think, as you get further away from your own organization. So if you're working with a partner organization within like your secretariat, that's one thing. But if you're working across different groups and state government, or even further to utilities that are outside of state government, that can become increasingly challenging. But it's really critical, I think, to make the landscape one that's functional and can actually deliver on our goals. But in general, I think policy is a long-term tool. And to do that well, we need to be thinking years in advance before implementing policies. And then we need to be planning on implementing policies that will be there for decades, potentially. So it's really critical that we make sure that these are well aligned, well informed, and really structured in a way that can help us meet our climate goals in the state. So as far as like some of the specific policies, I mentioned this a little bit, but they're segmented to some extent between new buildings and existing buildings. So a lot of our new buildings are regulated through a building energy code that requires them to be relatively efficient. And in many ways, like we've sort of solved that problem. Buildings being built in Massachusetts are highly efficient and moving away from fossil fuels entirely. And those buildings will perform well for the next 30 years, which is wonderful. For existing buildings, it's much more complicated, the work that has to be done. And there's currently no established decarbonization policy applying to existing buildings. It's basically the largest gap that we have in policy, since we don't have an existing policy for existing buildings. However, that's something that would be fulfilled by the Clean Heat Standard, which would be a policy that would help consumers to move towards decarbonizing those buildings.
Great. And thinking about this kind of similar issue from the customer perspective, are there particular tools that you would recommend or that you utilize, recognizing that it can be cumbersome and potentially intimidating for customers to try to stitch together all of the information about all the various programs?
Yeah, I think we're in a kind of a lucky place in that there's been a lot of increasing resources on these challenges that have been coming in from the federal government on the state level. And in many ways, that's a great thing that there's more funds available, more interest in this space. However, it gets to the point where there's almost like too much information and too many programs that they start to become confusing, not only to consumers, but even to people who work in the industry, including myself, like trying to keep track of them all. And so we're at this point where we need to really focus on how to streamline what we're doing as states to coordinate state incentives, utility incentives, and align on how federal incentives are delivered as well. So that's also very complicated. It takes time to do, but I think there's sort of three levels of that we've been thinking about here in Massachusetts. The first one is informational alignment. So how do you make sure that all of the resources are available in one place, like on a website, so that if you're a consumer and you want to do something, you can look in one place and find that all. You don't have to go to 7 different places to figure that out. That's something that we've done pretty well in Massachusetts here. We have our Clean Energy Lives Here campaign and website, which is a hub for all of that information. But that's sort of like the easiest of these steps. The second step is really alignment of consumer requirements. So as we have programs, the utilities have programs, the federal government has programs. Are these programs aligned in what they're targeting? Are their timelines aligned? Are their incentives aligned? Are the equipment that they're supporting aligned? And that's really a critical thing for coordination to help make sure that programs and policies aren't working against each other. That's something we've done some of in Massachusetts, but we still have a bit of a ways to go. And then the third and last element is alignment of program administration and incentives. And this is maybe the most complicated one, but essentially, do you need to have 7 different entities providing incentives for the same project in the state? Or could they all be delivered by 1 or 2 entities? And you can't have a perfect one-stop shop that delivers all the incentives, because some will be federal, some will be state. But you certainly can work on consolidating what's out there in a way that could be more streamlined for the consumer. And if you're able to do that, that kind of brings the other things along. You have all the information in one place, you have all the requirements for those programs in one place and policies, and they can interact very efficiently under one roof. So that's really a long-term goal that I think is really, beneficial. And I think as states are looking to put some of these resources out in the field, I think there's an opportunity to try to think about how we can have them more streamlined and effective.
Thanks. Yeah, streamlining across many fronts is definitely an important part of this overall puzzle. So another potential concern as folks are thinking about switching to heat pumps is financial. Both thinking about the upfront cost and on the back end, the electric rates, how that will impact their electric bills. Can you talk a little bit about the financing and rate structures, the tools that you all are using in Massachusetts?
Yeah, this is really a big question. I know Dave brought this up earlier. I think there's a number of fronts there, both focusing on the upfront costs as well as the operational costs. And I think one aha moment that we had in Massachusetts in the last couple of years is that electric rates are typically not designed with heat pumps in mind. And I think when we took a closer look at that, we realized that people with heat pumps are usually overpaying on their electric bills, because heat pumps are typically operating when electricity is cheap. It's at night, it's in the winter time, it's not focused on summertime from a heating point of view. So the vast majority of that energy is used in off-peak periods. And because of that, they're using electricity when it's really the cheapest. And if you take a hard look at rate making, you realize that you can have heat pump rates that deliver electricity for lower cost than they're paying now. In fact, 2 utilities, Unitil and National Grid in Massachusetts, recently proposed heat pump rates, and I know Central Maine Power and some other jurisdictions have done so as well. And these can offer, anywhere from 20% or 15% up to 30% reductions in electric costs for heat pump users. So that's a really promising area that we're investigating and looking to expand here in Massachusetts. On the financing side, I think there have been a couple of recent developments which are exciting. We have our Massachusetts Community Climate Bank, which launched about a year ago and is offering lower cost capital to support low and moderate income households that are making improvements, energy improvements that will pay themselves back. They're offering lower interest rates, longer payment terms for that, in a way that helps make the project's cost savings as well as helps facilitate the carbon savings for that. And then one last area that I'm excited about is called tariffed on-bill financing, or also known as inclusive utility investment. And that's an opportunity for utilities to invest their funding into improvements in a building and to put the cost of doing that onto a meter and have that pay back over time on the electric meter. So this is a great solution for renters or low-income households, in that you can guarantee that the cost in doing this will be lower than what they were paying before. This kind of a project, you can dial in the incentive to make that happen. So that's a really neat approach that we're also looking at, and that we've piloted here with a municipal light plan.
Thanks for all of that. Sounds like there's some real good critical thinking happening about how to solve these problems for customers. So I think we can go ahead and transition, just in the interest of time, transition to Q&A. And then we'll give all the panelists, I know we've only had a chance to really scratch the surface on some of these really good and detailed programs that you all are working on. So if people have questions about specific types of programs and you want to hear more, please feel free to drop those in the Q&A. And then we'll give the panelists an opportunity to kind of wrap up with some big picture thoughts about best practices before we end the recording. So one question that we had before submitted with the registrations, what role can kind of hybrid heat, or the idea of using heat pumps to replace an AC unit, for example, but keeping a gas furnace in place just to use on the very coldest days. Is there a role for that? How do you all think about that? And Peter, I might start that question with you.
Sure, thanks, Louisa. Yeah, that's a great question, and I think in many ways that's how we saw a lot of heat pumps starting, is that people were installing these as supplemental systems where they'd be heating their living room or a part of their home, but also keeping the old system. I think there's certainly a role for that, and that is one option for how to transition towards heat pumps. I know that's happened a lot in Maine, but at the same time, there are places, including Massachusetts and Maine now, that are pushing for having entire replacements, but there's still a role for that. I think there's also been an assessment here in Massachusetts that looked at whether it makes sense to maintain gas infrastructure and gas appliances to help take the peak off of heat pumps on those coldest days. Is it worth it from a financial point of view? And is it a viable solution from a carbon point of view to maintain that gas infrastructure for that really peak cold period? And I think the answer that came out of that was really it's not the most cost-effective way to do it, and that there's a lot of potential methane issues with maintaining the infrastructure. To maintain this infrastructure would cost tens of billions of dollars, and using that for the 100 coldest hours of the year just to save on some infrastructure costs, the electric side just didn't really pencil out.
Thanks. Yeah, go ahead, Hank.
Yeah, no, I think what Peter said is absolutely right. And, a lot of this, of course, is personal and customer choice and awareness of the products. And, I think we're still fighting some misinformation out there about the advances in heat pump technology. But they are, proven to work well into the negative temperatures. You lose efficiency, but they work. I've been on all heat pumps for a long time now. Swapped out my air conditioner for that, removed a boiler, been working fine throughout all of the New England winters. And it's just it's a wonderful way to sort of free up and simplify your technology in your home, and get that added comfort of the air conditioning, more efficient air conditioning in the summer. So. But I think, we've just got to keep informing people and letting folks know what the technology is up to and what it's capable of.
I would just reiterate what you guys said. We are the conversations we had in developing the market assessment reflected that that stakeholders saw a role for both sort of hybrid systems, partial displacement, and as well as these kinds of whole home systems for different reasons. There's sort of an easier it's an easier adoption kind of solution for some customers. There might be an opportunity to specifically around central air conditioning systems, and that market it's very large. If we could the cost on the manufacturer side to change those to two-way heat pumps, heating and cooling systems is very low, and so that would be a fairly easy pathway to switch from those central ACs to heat pumps. It introduces questions about behavior and controls of those systems, but definitely an easier way to drive deployment of heat pumps. And then I think we still want the programs and the market to really push the leading edge of the solutions, like Hank mentioned, and really demonstrate that this is a system that can meet needs even in cold climates as a standalone system. So I'd say there's don't need to choose here at this point. I'd say there's opportunities for both.
Thank you all. Great answers. Another question, how much does electricity demand from heat pumps impact energy demand forecasts and the need for new energy resources, potential pressure on rates for new infrastructure? If anybody wants to jump in first, feel free to go for it.
Yeah, I'm happy to start on that one. So I think Yeah, certainly. I think under a lot of forecasts for an increasingly electrified society, for electric vehicles and for buildings, that there certainly is a need to build out our electrical infrastructure as well as with solar. And I think there's a lot of benefits that come with it beyond just supporting new technologies. But I think a lot of ways our electrical grid is very much outdated and doesn't lack the resiliency or security or flexibility that would be most valuable to our society. But in building that out, I think there's, it's not something that's entirely understood, the exact costs and level of build out, because there's a lot of unknowns about how flexible we can make these systems. So, for example, in incorporating battery storage or electric vehicles and demand response, there can be a lot of ways to shift the build out to be lower than one might anticipate otherwise. But I think in terms of rates, I think that's a great part of the question, because I think rates are comprised of two things. One, it's the dollar amount, so how much it costs. But number two is the volume of energy going through. So even if we spend 3 times more than we've spent so far on an electricity system, if we're using 3 times more electricity, the rates will stay the same. So that's an important thing to think about as we look at electric build out and rates and how they relate. And if you spend less than 3x the current cost on build out, but you go up 3 times the volume, rates could go down. So there's some uncertainty in exactly how that plays out. I will say the opposite is true on the gas system as well. Since you have a fixed infrastructure cost there, the dollars kind of stay the same. But as you're backing off volume in the gas system, it creates an upward pressure on rates, which is important to think about, especially when you're talking about relative pricing of heat pumps versus fossil fuels like natural gas.
Yeah, I think, Peter's absolutely right. And I just, I always like to drop in some additional context too, that we have doubled the size of the grid several times before. We've always needed to make investments to accommodate new technologies, things like refrigeration. That was a huge increase in the grid demand. And so, when we're looking at these issues and most of the forecasts, point to, us having about a decade of headroom on the system in general. I mean, certain parts of a distribution grid might need additional upgrades at different points, but that's something that is a constant evolution of the grid. And to Peter's point, with making those investments, you also can gain resiliency, sustainability. You can have, better storm response. All of these different elements act together. And one other nugget is we're also talking or hearing about, proposed developments of data centers. And in terms of grid demand, those economic development opportunities present, much larger amounts of demand on the grid than at least the near term aggregate demand that heat pumps might offer. So, we just basically, I think, need to remember that we've built the grid out before and continue to utilize it for more and more things, and that I don't expect that trend to stop.
Thanks. Well, we're coming up on the top of the hour. So I think I'll just give each of you, if you want to kind of give the last 30-second or minute quick pitch about what are the most important things that you think utility regulators need to understand about heat pump adoption. And then we'll wrap up the recording, but we'll keep doing Q&A. So if audience members, if you want to keep dumping questions in the Q&A, please go for that. And let's just go in the order that each of you spoke. So David, we'll start with you.
I guess I'd just leave them with the fact that there are still a lot of opportunities to help grow this market. And laying out some of the areas that are considered barriers for adoption around the economics are not always favorable, whether it's the upfront cost or installed cost. Really supporting efforts and activities around workforce development, installer training. The rates issue and the opportunities to address some of the economic challenges is likely to fall very much in their purview. So I would say follow this and educate yourself on where some of the early discussions are headed. Those are a couple thoughts.
A couple of areas of focus that come to mind are, one, thinking about overall efficiency of energy. So, a heat pump, an air source heat pump is roughly 270% efficient. A ground source heat pump, approaching 500% efficient. Whereas a gas furnace, your most efficient gas furnace is less than 100%. And so thinking about regulated energy in those terms, you may be adding electrical load, but you are also adding to the overall efficiency of our energy systems by moving to heat pumps. And so that's, I think, a point for consideration and thinking about maybe future frameworks of how we regulate energy. And then the second area that I think is a really interesting topic for how to do this with program administrators and others is there's still a lot of variance in expertise and costs for heat pump installations amongst the contractor community. I recently had a new construction mini split installed, and I got 5 quotes, and they range from just under 6,000 to over 10,000. So there's a lot of variance, even within a simple application like that, where there were no idiosyncrasies. So I think the more that we can collectively work on trying to get a clear answer on what should it cost, then that'll benefit adoption as well.
Yeah, and I'll leave my last thought here, I think, is maybe really paying attention to the timescales of things. So for example, even making policies takes years, so you need to be ahead on that. Implementation of policy takes decades, but even more so on the physical side of it. If someone's installing a system today, be it a gas boiler or a heat pump, that system will be operating for the next 15 to 20 years, which will take us to the 2040s. And I think that's important to think about those time scales where we have very few decision points where people can make those transitions. And even more so when we talk about this on infrastructure, if we're replacing a gas main today with an operational lifetime of over 50 years, what will that look like in terms of the balance sheets and its actual useful timeline for operation? So I think we make a lot of decisions that have implications for decades, and I think that's important to be thinking about when making policies and taking actions today.
Wow, this has been a great discussion. Thanks for this excellent conversation. Peter, Hank, David, Vivian, and Louisa. This was really good. And those of you who attended, thank you all for your attention, for your great questions. As noted earlier, and Louisa just brought this up, what we do is sort of end the recording at 60 minutes. We take a deep breath, and then we continue for another 30 minutes if there continue to be questions. So please feel free to continue with us. And I'm going to hand it back to you, Louisa.
Thanks, David. So I think let's talk about best practices in addressing energy burden, particularly thinking about disadvantaged communities or environmental justice communities, and how do we address the particular concerns and bring those communities along as we decarbonize buildings. And Hank, maybe I'll let you start.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, this is a really important challenge for us to meet. And I think, look again, zooming out and looking at the whole picture of what causes the energy burden and what holistic solutions that we can pursue to really alleviate that is an important pursuit for regulators and for anybody that's working in this policy space. And so one of the things that I'm really pleased with about Connecticut DEEP is that we instituted with the help of many state partners a residential energy preparation services program, which helps to overcome pre-weatherization barriers And so, that helps address those long historical, often health and safety issues in housing that precludes folks from being able to make just basic energy efficiency improvements on the envelope and insulation and all of that. And so, we're sort of progressing down this very linear, in a very linear way, REPS program, energy efficiency improvements, and then if we can package together electrification of, appliances, whether it's space heaters, water heaters, cooking equipment, whatever it is, trying to make all of that work. And as you've already weatherized, then you generally need less energy needs overall because you're in a less leaky and drafty space. And then, taking it out to the next level, trying to incorporate our the EPA Solar for All grant project as well, so we can distribute more rooftop solar to benefit communities that have historically been underserved and overburdened by pollution. So that sounds like a lot, and it is. There's a lot of things to do there. But if you look at the long game and if you look at really trying to improve the quality of housing, improve the quality of homes where people are doing homework and sitting around the kitchen table and, all of these things, I think it makes a really clear, at least directional trajectory for us to pursue for the good of all of the constituents.
Yeah, I entirely agree with everything Hank said there. I mean, I'll add on the last part. I mean, thinking about occupant wellness and indoor air quality, I think are real tangible health benefits that we see out of decarbonizing buildings and removing fossil fuels. So I think that's something that is a real benefit directly. It's also a financial benefit to society, which there's been some studies where that plays out into the billions of dollars per year of value.
I would just looking at it from a slightly different perspective, on the implementation of programs that I think is worth highlighting around the need to partner with folks in the communities that these programs are trying to serve. I know a number of programs in the region who have made that a new emphasis is to not just say, hey, we're offering these say LMI or income eligible programs, but who is helping us to communicate them and to market them to the right audiences. So I think on the implementation side, that's huge. And to the point I think Hank made earlier, just in terms of the accessibility of programs, in cases where there are a lot of offerings, making those, removing that confusion, the complication of a lot of different offerings. So really making that streamlined. So I'd say just getting the voices, harnessing, leveraging the voices that are going to be the most effective and rolling it out in a way that is very easy and accessible.
Yeah, all of that makes a lot of sense. Very good answers. I think the streamlining, the making sure that you're bringing in partners from most impacted communities and really centering their voices is absolutely critical in all of these efforts. Another question, how can we maximize heat pump benefits through influencing customer behaviors? If anyone has thoughts they want to chime in on that, I'll leave it open.
This is a really tricky one. Just based on the experience in the Northeast, I think Peter mentioned that a lot of early adoption in the Northeast has been ductless systems. We have a lot of hydronic heating, so a lot of ductless systems went in, and this raised the question of operating air source heat pump in conjunction or coordination with existing systems. And there are behavioral strategies to maximize use of heat pumps, and I think those are still playing out. The early lesson was consumers operate them as heating systems less than we would expect them to. So there has certainly been efforts to try to message that to consumers, the opportunity to run them instead of an existing fossil system or instead of an existing electric resistance system. So so one of the big, I think what the response to that was a pretty big effort to try to roll out better, more sophisticated control systems that could take that behavior out of the hands or make it a lot less straightforward for a consumer to not really have to behave in a certain way to maximize impacts. And I'd say that has been a bumpy road, rolling a lot of some of these integrated controls out into the market. And so this sort of goes back to potentially getting, the benefits of whole home systems are that you get away from any kind of coordination between multiple systems, and heat pumps are it's a no-brainer, right? The heat pump is your heating system, and it's addressing 100% of the heating throughout the year. So I'd say short answer is there's still education and awareness around that could certainly impact behaviors and increase the kinds of impacts from heat pumps.
Yeah, I think just dovetailing off of everything David said, that consumer education and awareness of how to manage these systems is really key. I mean, it works off of airflow, so keeping the air filters clean is really it makes a big difference on the performance of the systems, and that's a simple thing, but just getting folks used to it, like they got used to changing their oil in a vehicle every so often, right? It's that kind of just routine that you have to get into, and then also because they are such dynamic machines that can do heating, air conditioning, dehumidification, just simple fan, really making sure that customers understand which settings are best for their home, to make sure that they're using the energy most efficiently and not unintentionally, having it on the wrong setting for weeks or months at a time.
Great, thanks. So the next question, this ties in a little bit with a discussion from earlier. Should a utility or a regulator have the authority to decide to replace all of the gas infrastructure in a given area? Or would you recommend an alternative approach?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's one, honestly, that hasn't really been answered yet. And I think some ways to think about that might be helpful. I think as we've thought in Massachusetts about gas infrastructure and gas usage, that at some point for us to meet our goals, we really need to move away from it, and that's something we understand. And I think the next question we asked is like, what's the most cost-effective way to get there? And that takes into account a lot of different decisions. And I think if you're using that sort of utility-driven direction, that's one approach. That's sort of you're sort of optimizing around utility decision-making versus consumers sort of having to elect to do that in sort of a randomized fashion around the state. So I think when we've looked at if you don't have some sort of strategic thinking around gas infrastructure, the costs of gas become higher and higher and become very burdensome, especially to those that don't have the opportunity to get off gas. So it's a real burden, especially on lower income customers, if you don't think more creatively about how to handle gas infrastructure. I think on the logistical side, I think the question is, has been considered in a way that, like, if you're currently on gas and you really love being on gas, and the utility is not going to replace the leaking gas pipe in front of your house, that person can transition to propane on a propane tank, and that will likely be cheaper for them in the long term and for the society than to stay on a very expensive gas infrastructure in the long term. So that's an option if people really feel strongly. That said, when the option has been put in front of people in places like Framingham, where they installed a network geothermal system, the vast majority of people were excited to move on to electric appliances and realize the benefits of adding air conditioners, having more advanced heating systems that don't have fossil fuels, and then adding induction or electric cooking in a way that they might find preferential above gas appliances. So there's a lot of co-benefits that go along with that I think people are excited about. So I don't think there would be great resistance ultimately once people realize the benefits of these technologies and realize that there isn't really a way to keep a gas system operating without having emissions and being inexpensive. It's just sort of an impossible thing to do. So I think those are really important drivers as people consider that question.
Yeah, I think Peter's absolutely right that, there needs to be a strategic evaluation of all of those options and, thinking broadly, what is the highest and best use of of fossil fuels, which are a finite resource, and is it, are there other options that make better use of energy systems to deliver things like heating and cooling and cooking, and I think there are. And so, some of that strategic analysis could look at, okay, you have gas mains that serve industrial customers. They run by residential communities. Okay, maybe you start pruning the tree with the residential communities because there are options for them that are decarbonized and safe and don't have emissions associated with it. But those industrial customers may not have a feasible alternative for much longer. So really thinking about the highest and best use of those resources and regular ratepayer dollars is really important to think about.
Thanks. Yeah, lots of things for decision makers to be considering, certainly. So I think we'll just transition now to final thoughts, any kind of last things that any of our panelists want to share. And let's go Peter, then Hank, then David.
Yeah, I'll say entities like the Regulatory Assistance Project and others that can bring different states together as we all face these challenging questions. Because I think the reality is we're all working a little bit in uncharted waters here about how to make a really significant energy transition in the coming decades. I think it takes a lot of planning ahead of time. And I think being able to share some of the practices with other states and figure out what's working and what isn't working is a really effective way to do it. But that said, I think it's also a time when we do see a need to be making these changes in order to reduce our carbon emissions and modernize our energy system. And I think it's important to also recognize that if we aren't proactive enough in making these changes, there are consequences towards consumer costs. If we delay making decisions, it gets more and more expensive to make these changes later. So I think there's a lot of important regulatory thoughts on how to really meet our carbon goals in the most cost-effective way possible, and how to do it in a way that takes into account those that are the most vulnerable, the low-income households, and so on. But it takes a lot of foresight and some boldness to be undertaking the policies to get there.
Yeah, not much to add, but just, again, speaking to the sort of strategic approach of trying to figure out how to solve this massive challenge of decarbonization broadly, in the building space, there is a big divide between new construction and existing construction, right? And I think that the answer is pretty clear for new construction and how we can most effectively and efficiently build, and we should just be moving rapidly towards all electric standards, and it seems to be pretty clear that that's a solution. It gets obviously more challenging with the idiosyncrasies of existing building stock, and that's the larger piece of the puzzle. But there's so many options on the market today and coming forth that are going to really help. I think help with New England's large percentage of hydronic heating systems, for instance. There's going to be applications for that really soon, so that it's not going to be so challenging to decarbonize and switch your equipment. And I think if we can also get ahead of the game and collect more data about the useful life of existing and incumbent systems and develop strategies to get ahead of that so that when it comes time for a replacement, we have the decarbonized solution already penciled out and ready to go. That's going to be really helpful, because if we have an emergency replacement of a fossil system for a fossil system, as Peter or David noted earlier, that's a system that's then going to be in place for another 15, 20 years. That's a fire that gets lit today and keeps burning for that time period when we're trying to decarbonize across the economy. So, those holistic views are, I think, really important to keep in mind.
I'll just keep it simple. I just say, stay engaged with these kinds of collaboration platforms, whether it's RAP or NESCOM, NECPUC, NARUC, NEEPs. I mean, I think it's like Peter said, a lot of value in looking for those opportunities to partner across state lines, and that would be my final thought.
Right. What a great job. Thank you all so much for this webinar this afternoon. Peter and Hank and David, thank you for taking time out of your work and helping us put this together. And Vivian and Louisa, nice job running the conversation. Look forward to hearing more from you. Like you all are doing really important stuff. Thanks again.